Welcome to the HR Uprising podcast. This podcast series explores HR hot topics and challenges through conversations with relevant experts and real-life HR, learning, and OD professionals. The HR Uprising is about learning through collaboration and evidence-based action. We want colleagues to have the confidence and skills to rise up through their organizations by delivering real, lasting business value. Now, introducing your host, chartered psychologist, experienced change agent, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach, Lucinda.
Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And today is a very special day. I'm recording this introduction on the 21st of May 2020, and for those of you who listen regularly, you'll know that today was the launch of my book called How to Be a Change Superhero. Last night we had a fantastic launch party. It was so much fun, actually. It's amazing how much fun you can have virtually. And there were loads of people who joined me, which I'm really, really grateful for everyone's support, including a number of people who listened to the podcast. So that was wonderful. I am going to do a bit of a shout out, I said, to some of these people just to say thank you very much for joining in terms of that. And well, before I do that, I wanted to share hot off the press news that as of half an hour ago, the book made it not only into the charts within the Amazon charts, but we actually made it to number one in the best sellers in HR and personnel management. So I'm so chuffed actually that I can say it's a bestseller. So there you go. By the way, by the time you listen to this, it will have gone back down to the normal price actually, but hopefully some people will have already managed to take advantage of the bargain price that we've got out there on the Kindle edition. So do listen up. And the other thing actually is that imminently the Audible version. So on the premise that a number of people like podcasts, keep an eye out. I will announce when the Audible is out, but it will be coming soon as well, if that might be of interest. And we'll put some sort of introductory pricing on that. So thank you for all your support if you were one of the supporters. And just in terms of those who joined, I wanted to share, we did lots of competitions. We had superhero quizzes, people changing their names to superhero personas. It was really quite a giggle and there was lots of lovely chat. And I thought I'd share here the winners, or some of the winners, because you may well be listening. So in terms of the superhero persona, we had Christopher Thomas, the mustached mobiliser, was a winner. Lucia Abugatis, who is HR Llama, and I wanted to mention her anyway. She's on Twitter as HR Llama. She's got a book out as well, and she's done it on Kindle Unlimited, actually, I think. So it's available free for a short period of time. Her term is Fighting HR Fluffiness. So I thought that was really lovely, and I had a chat with Lucia, so that was lovely too. Rowan, Empathy Eagle, was also a winner in terms of superhero personas. In terms of winners of the quiz, we had Helen Rothbottom and Emma Pearson, and then Vicky Osborne and Priya Garaji. And then finally on the raffle, we had Ruth Cornish, she's a good friend of ours, Bob Winnington, Sarika Garg. We had Ian Olivo, Jenny Bannerman won three free 360s, and the top winner who won the change training was Andy McPherson. So I hope to meet some of you. I've met some people on there, but lots of you haven't. And I hope to meet some of you in person. Obviously, the training is actually virtual, and I mentioned last week that I would share about that. So that's out on our website. And if you are interested in doing more about change and actually applying change, then we have now got a virtual training program that's just been released, and we'll be running it for the first time in September. So enough about that. I'm a bit overexcited, but let's now move over to our fantastic conversation with Rebecca Ray. And there's some really useful materials that we've put in the show notes that you can download to support HR professionals in terms of a checklist to manage the way through the crisis that is still going on as we revert back to a type of normality. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. So over to you, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a distinct pleasure, Lucinda. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, that's lovely. So Well, we were having a great chat, weren't we, to such an extent before we started recording, that I guess it's about us rewinding back a little bit, because there's so many areas that you can go into. But what we wanted to do was make sure that this is a very practical conversation for people about how can they give people the best start in the workplace, in terms of how can we prepare, particularly as HR professionals, about the next phase, I guess, of returning people to the workplace, if that indeed is the way to go. What's your view on this?
Well, I think there's no end to the number of people who are quick to tell you what the new normal, the next normal, the reimagined workplace, or whatever other label they've chosen is going to look like. And I'm afraid that we don't really know. And I can't imagine that collectively, as a profession, or even as a member of the world, that we're going to emerge from this unscathed. I think this will have a deep impact on our psyche, our profession, our worlds, and who we are as humans for a long time to come, similar to those whose characters forged through war or deprivation or other crises in the world. And so I think the first question we should probably ask is returning, or an attempt to return to the way things were, even a viable option or the right option? I think many of us are in industries that are fundamentally changed, and so much about the way in which we went to market, or the ways in which we served customers, or the types of skills that our people needed, or the types of people we may have needed, may all be subject for really serious review. And I think it behooves all of us to help ask the right questions so that we can do the best we can to support not only the organization's mission in whatever revision or impacts that may have had, but also the employees and the customers we serve and our stakeholders. So the first question, I think, should be, what do we need to do right now to help? Because obviously everyone is in a different phase of this. And I know many of your listeners are in the UK and broader Europe. And so, you've been addressing this for a longer time than we have here in the United States. And some of my colleagues in Europe have kept me apprised of things, but my colleagues in Asia who were at an even earlier phase of this, they've all seen lessons, and I often listen to them to see what they are now going through as a second wave, or as ramifications of getting back to work start to take hold. So the future has arrived. You know how they used to say, the future has arrived, but just not evenly distributed. I think the impact of this is here too. It's not the same. Even in the United States, we're looking at a move now out of some of the epicenters and into the heartland that was relatively untouched by much of this. And so you're seeing flare-ups in many rural or suburban areas. And I think, we've got a ways to go before we think we have this in the rearview mirror. So I think there's the initial, what do we do now to keep our people safe and to continue to try to do business? And at the conference board, we do have a global community, and we do have a great deal that we've put together for the support of our members and actually the public. We've made much of this public as we all strive to get through the COVID-19 pandemic, from economic scenarios to models, to all of the work we've done in the human capital space, to governance, marketing, sustainability. So trying to put a holistic set of tools and support together in one place. We did, however, expand that a bit and put in a human capital section as well. And I would encourage your listeners to take a look if they'd like. If you just go to our website, you'll see the COVID-19 resources. And if you click through, you'll see there's one on human capital. And what we did was curate all the best resources we could find, ours and others, and then all of the programming that we've got around COVID, and then a series of 10 very short rapid response pieces on what to do right now. Looking at alternatives to layoffs, or if you have to do them, to do them in a compassionate and humane way, about compensation and benefit strategies to help employees navigate through this, a little bit about onboarding and why that's still important, talent acquisition and how that continues, employee engagement. And something that we also talked about was support for well-being and mental health. And, this is a horrible pandemic, but one of the things that has been heartening to see is the focus on supporting employees' mental health and well-being through this crisis in a way that I've not seen in earlier challenges that we've faced. And if that's one good thing that comes out of this, is an acknowledgement that employees really do have to bring their whole selves to work. And when they can't, it puts the organization at a disadvantage, and we want to try to make people whole and support them through this. And I have really welcomed seeing the emphasis that so many have put on employee well-being and mental health. So those were the first things we did. We did about 10 of those just to get them out there, about leading virtual teams. And so that's what's out there now. And that's really the here and now. And in a moment, we can talk a little bit about, shifting our sight into returning.
So obviously, thank you for pointing those out. We'll make sure that I put links to those. So those are resources that any of our listeners can download and access.
Yes, indeed.
And as we were saying before, what I really like is things which are quite practical that people can take away actually from just listening to the podcast. So I know that they can access those, but you're also saying in terms of the questions, we're talking about what can we do right now to help, asking those questions, and actually about thinking about how can we put our well-being of our stuff first and also keep ourselves in business. I suppose just before then we maybe go into that sort of next stage of what people might do, or looking at the other questions, you mentioned 3 sort of strategic things which we need to keep our eye on. Well-being, which is key, and that is top of the list. Well-being, onboarding, and also talent acquisition. So those in theory are strategic and sort of things we have to do on a daily basis. Do you have any tips or recommendations, if there were just like a couple of takeaways in each of those areas that you'd suggest that people, professionals, thought about right now in those areas? If we started with well-being, for example.
Okay, sure. So it's one thing to close down the way in which you normally work. And I recognize fully that I'm sitting here with the privilege of being able to work remotely. I don't have to make a choice between a high-risk job and a paycheck and supporting my family. So let me just put that right there. And so there are many people for whom, remote working is not an option. Right. So, let's set aside for just a moment the folks who are contractual workers or informal workers or whatever they may be labeled, around the world. Those are folks who are particularly hard pressed at this time. There's some really good work the ILO's just put out on, what they project as the impacts there. And, it's a very challenging, very global problem. But if we're looking at predominantly around employees and sort of the employer's role in supporting them through this, I think as we look at mental health, I think we have to be ever vigilant and very communicative about what resources are there, and to encourage people to talk about the ways in which they are feeling, the stresses of this and the kinds of things that they can do. And I think this is one of those moments where if you're an authentic leader and you've mastered the core skill of empathy, that's really going to come to the forefront now. Because for employees, they need to look to leaders in whom they can trust, who believe that these leaders actually may not have all the answers, but they'll work in ways with others to get them, and that they will lead their employees safely through this. We are all looking for that kind of leadership. And so when leaders are authentic, when they talk about the fact that they care about the whole person, when they are vulnerable themselves, and when they instill a sense of purpose and eventual positive outcome for employees, that's what I think employees are looking for now in their leaders. So not being aware of the level of anxiety that employees have is a real flaw, I think, for leaders now. They need to be able to tell stories about how they faced challenges in the past. They need to be able to talk about perhaps their own vulnerabilities. They have to make sure that employees understand what's available to them in terms of, third-party folks who can support them through this, or maybe even taking a look, to the extent that a company can, to offer these well-being services or therapy sessions, as Starbucks did, for example. And it's really about helping people stay connected. And part of what exacerbates mental health issues is feelings of isolation. And we're only talking about those situations where people are now quarantined or in self-isolation with people they ostensibly love, right? Now, their children are home, they are teachers, and they are now caregivers, and they are supporting perhaps another working adult. And we are all testing the limits of our Wi-Fi capabilities. And so for a lot of people, this is tough, but it's manageable. There are other folks for whom being compelled to work from home is their worst nightmare, because home is not a safe place. So there's a whole myriad of challenges and situations here. So I think it's important for every leader to be very conscious of the people on their team. How are they doing? What are the changes in behavior? When have you seen their participation or engagement levels begin to wane? It's very easy on some of these Zoom calls where, you're one of a mass of people, for someone to not be fully engaged, for someone to sort of fade away. And I think leaders need to be very aware who's not participating, who hasn't been involved. Have I reached out to this person to check to see how they're doing? Have I offered moral support? And look, that's the hard thing about being a leader, right? There are many times you can't fix the problem these people have, particularly if they're furloughed, or they've taken pay cuts, or they're anxious about the future, or their bonuses have been removed, in many parts of the world. You can't fix that, but you can be an ear and a shoulder.
And it's an interesting one, isn't it? The whole well-being thing, because with this move across the world to us not just working from home, but working from home, and it is acceptable for there to be interruptions, as I can hear in the background my daughter shouting me at the moment, even though I've told her on a podcast. So I'm just ignoring, because she's 16 and should know better. But, the whole sort of that which would perhaps have been frowned upon, those kinds of interruptions, the human aspect is acceptable, I guess, until maybe people go back to school and that sort of thing. And yet, I suppose the awareness and the acceptability of the whole person brings so many. I feel like we were able to compartmentalize before, and you had to just come in and bring your professional self into the office or to the Zoom call if you were working from home, and none of these other external stresses were acceptable. So the stuff was there, but perhaps it wasn't stuff we needed to be aware of. Whereas now, as you're saying, there's authentic leadership. My take from what you're saying there is actually one of the most powerful things we could do as HR professionals or people professionals is to remind the leaders and the managers of how powerful and important it is for them to show their own vulnerabilities, their whole selves, and also to recognise that, I think, for the long term with people, that people bit and that empathy first, because it's perhaps something that I think it's something perhaps was secondary in the workplace. My question is whether, when everyone goes back to school, whether it'll just swing back to how it used to be, and then that might mean we get mental health issues swept under the carpet. I don't know.
Yeah, well, certainly, Lucinda, we all hope that won't happen. But I think your point is well taken. In the past, if you had a child that came through the room during a remote call that you were working from home, it was somehow or other you were a lesser person because you couldn't control the environment in which you're working remotely. Yeah. And I think now it's so intimate. You are in everyone's living room. Yeah. Now, sometimes I look at their decor and I say, okay, I would not have made that choice, but chintz is not my thing. But it's very leveling. Even when sometimes by default and maybe as a reflex we say, oh, I'm so sorry, that's my toddler. We all say, no worries. It's not. It's very egalitarian in some ways, I think.
it'd be nice to keep that. So I think, but the point is maybe as from takeaways, as being practical as HR professionals and not being philosophical, is I think our role is maybe to try and be the glue and be that reminder and remind, especially in some organisations and some industries where there are very stressed, maybe smaller businesses and their founders that are running it. There'll be some very stressed people who are trying to keep the business afloat, and therefore they may impose, I don't know, conditions or expectations on workers which become difficult in terms of their well-being. So it's quite a difficult juggling act, I think, for some HR professionals there.
No, I think that's exactly right. And, it's one thing to encourage leaders to be authentic, but hopefully we, as a profession, have been successful in helping leaders understand what good leadership looks like, so that it's sort of like, this is not the time to learn empathy, right? So, if you're a caring leader and empathetic by nature, or have learned the tools to become one, that would be great preparation for a future crisis,
Yes.
Not to try to learn it in the moment.
Yeah. And so in terms of the other two items that we just mentioned, and obviously we can go into more broader stuff in terms of preparing the workspace and the other sort of angles. But, these other aspects, so onboarding, I guess if people do go back, there's a bit of a recruitment drop, but yet you're saying that onboarding is still really important. And virtual onboarding, quite tricky, isn't it? Have you got any tips in that area?
Sure. So just before I go there, let's go to talent acquisition, because I think that sort of sets up the onboarding thing, right? So, I think for a while we're going to see talent acquisition of new talent generally coalesce around critical roles, right?
Yeah.
Or those where there is great risk if it's a role where the rate of infection might be higher, and so you're going to need to have other teams, and if you have to stagger the workforce or have them work in smaller shifts or smaller teams or now around the clock in different shifts, you're going to need more people of the same kind, and yet the risk for infection for them is higher. So thinking about, that's probably where the focus of a lot of the recruiting will be. Then it will also be what the critical roles were most likely before all of this happened. You need people who are going to be able to support the ongoing business goals of the organization. And so that, I'm sure, will continue as well. I think you're going to need to be very creative in some ways. So I think I would try to couple the talent acquisition choices that you make with an understanding of, is this now going forward what the business is going to need? And I recognize that, we're all sort of in the moment right now, so you're not going to make the world's best decisions or the most complete ones. But at least to say, do we need to have that many floor reps? Probably not, because you're going to have fewer people on the floor, in a retail setting, for example. And, do you need as many? Or, we don't need as many people to do face-to-face pharmaceutical sales, but we need an awful lot more people to be in let's say, an online mode as we think about how we market to physicians. I'm just, a couple of just quick examples, but you just need to ask, do we really need what we used to?
And now is an opportunity to reshape it potentially. Exactly.
So part of this, and in a moment we talk about preparing to return, it's really understanding, are we in the same business? And if so, does it look quite the same way? The other thing I would say is that, especially if you know that some of the needs are going to shift, take a look at your internal candidates to see which skills might be transferable. And so maybe, here's where you have people who have already been vetted. They already understand the culture. They understand the processes of your organization. And perhaps their skill set will allow them to, make a fairly quick transition into a role that you now need. The other thing that I would say is that I'm very aware of many of these efforts in the United States anyway, to work on sort of a business-to-business basis, so that people who have a surplus of talent can connect with organizations who need large numbers of people with particular skills. And it's not a job board, but it's all business to business. And so we're part of one called People and Work, being led by Accenture. And so what we've tried to do is help companies connect. And that's been a really great outcome, because what these companies have decided to do is to say, I need 200 drivers in the Detroit metro area, and maybe somebody is part of a airlines hub there, and they say, well, we have these folks with these skills and they're drivers, and they just, whether it's permanent or temporary, we'll take them. And what they've done is been very collaborative here, so that, for example, they may not have to go through quite the same level of screening. They will assume that, they'll verify it down the road, but immediately they can get the help they need and keep people employed. And, that's amazing to watch.
That's quite smart collaboration. I take it there's non-competitive businesses.
To be honest, it's a mix. And so sometimes people might have thought twice about this. It's more about what can we do to help society right now? Which
it's the right
I
thing
just
to
think
do.
is fabulous. It's the right thing to do.
But bigger picture, like the whole sort of abundance mentality and helping everybody.
Exactly right.
Love
exactly
it.
Right.
On that talent acquisition point, I think that's quite an interesting one, because you often would see that. I remember being in an organisation, and you think, why is it that quite often people would have to leave in order to come back in a more senior role? Do you think that actually we might get better at developing talent internally or finding talent internally as a result of this?
I certainly hope so. I mean, part of the reason why we would complain in past years about turnover is because, you can move and you can perhaps make more money or a title. And, part of it is the syndrome of the shiny penny. I don't know if that translates to all of your listeners.
Something new. It's new and shiny.
Yeah, you get this shiny new person from outside, and, and let's be candid, myself included, we all have our personal flaws and wonderfulness. And our mothers could probably rattle off the list of all those things in a hurry. But if you're an external person, not everything is known. Everybody looks very shiny, as opposed to the internal person who might, we say, well, that's just fill in the blank. And, we kind of know his or her limitations, and, they're ours and we love them. But,
maybe that's the thing, is, again, we could encourage much more of an open mind about people's opportunities to develop their potential, isn't it? It's almost being more positive about people's potential internally, because you'd save quite a lot of cost with less recruitment and less onboarding, as well, in that sort of circumstance.
That's right. And we all know the success rates of those who are internal versus external, particularly at senior levels. So
are there statistics on that, Rebecca? Have you got figures on that?
I haven't seen the most recent ones, but generally speaking, it's well north of 50%.
Really?
So, why take a chance, particularly in a critical hire role, when you don't have to? So I'm hopeful that we cast another eye on internal candidates. But even if you do bring from outside, and God knows we will need to do that,
of course.
I think the onboarding process is critically important as well. Because if you think about it, I am biased. Well, I'll just put that right on the table. I've done a lot of work in the employee engagement and experience area, and I was a former chief talent officer and all that. And so I'm a big fan of getting the culture right. And I am of the belief that you do an awful lot of things right across the human capital or human resources spectrum. But if you don't get the culture right, a lot of those things won't add up to the results that you hope for.
Yeah.
And especially now, when we have people who are, to greater or lesser degrees, perhaps going to be working more remotely than ever in the past. And if you're onboarding someone who's never set foot in the office and is now working from his or her home and expected to sort of embrace the company culture and the mission and all of those things, and try to work that much harder to build relationships with people they've never met, but now, you have a shared mutual destiny. That's so important to get onboarding and also continual support right. So when I think about onboarding, it isn't the, hi, here's your first day, here's your, your badge, and let's sheep dip you for a day in the company culture, and here's our 4 main goals, and here's our revenue targets for the year, and good luck and God bless. This onboarding process now has to be, I think, completely rethought. So it starts well before day one, and then I think it must be a concerted effort to reach this person virtually across multiple channels, whether that's colleagues or someone's direct supervisor or the buddy that you set up for someone or whatever other things that you have, but frequent check-ins, helping that person, make introductions to other people, helping him or her feel like a member of the team in a much faster way, because that isolation and the risk that someone will not make those connections is so much greater now that it's remote. And so that's why I think it's really important.
I mean, I 100% agree with you. And you think, you get video and things like that. And actually, to be honest, though, I think people could do a better job of that in these circumstances because they're more alert to the fact that this is needed. I mean, we know there's also stats about people deciding lots of new starters don't stay with a business because we spend all this money on recruitment and then they have a pretty poor experience. The line manager maybe, if you're lucky, shows up for day one, doesn't give them a proper, set of introductions or buddy. There's lots of times that onboarding is done really badly when we had a normal circumstance. So again, these are not necessarily new problems. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to wake up and smell the coffee about how this is a very human activity in terms of bringing people on and making them feel part of something and connected.
I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
The other thing is interesting to me is there's the culture thing. So what do you see? It's almost, because again, culture was something that we could just take for granted. We were busy business. There was lots of business as usual going on, wasn't there? A transactional workplace, I think it was kind of happening. Now we've realised we need to work a bit harder to give people priorities, to focus, make them feel involved and look after their well-being, onboard them. If we stand back, probably all things we really should have done. We need to maybe put the human first. And does that mean, therefore, that we need to refocus our cultures, or is it actually about living up to the culture that we say we have? I mean, culture is a very funny one anyway, isn't it? Is this now a time to rethink of our culture and how we are perceived to our workers?
Well, sure. The culture, every organization has a culture. It may not be the one you espouse, and it may not be the one you hope. But, just like every family, every organization has a culture. And so it's palpable, particularly when you're around folks. And you can help influence culture through lots of different ways, and the ways in which leaders speak to employees and the way in which the employees feel valued or included. And, a lot of that's a lot easier when you're able to be physically together. So in the absence of doing that, or at least to the same degree that you used to, you need to think about, how can we do these things? Now, I know many organizations have chosen to over-communicate. Now, always, I think for all of us who are leaders, you think you've said it 17 times and surely everyone understands. And then you realize, no, we must say it again. And so it's that constant communication, explanation, saying it in different ways, different formats. But it's also about bringing employees into decisions, into conversations, and into more of the team projects. It's very easy, I think, for us to assume that everybody gets it. Mm-hmm. And I think for anyone who is either new, or for those people who either their personalities or their cultural underpinnings or ethnicity makes them less likely to perhaps take a lead role or to speak up or whatever other challenges there may be, it's important for leaders to reach out, or supervisors to reach out and ask people how they're doing and what's their opinion. And so maybe they're not comfortable in a group setting, well, pick up the phone or use a Zoom call and check in with somebody and say, I didn't get how you felt about this during the call and thought I'd talk about it. And we think we have a plan, but from where you sit, what could be the thing that makes this less successful than we want it to be? And just sit and listen to somebody.
Listening is key, isn't it? Rather than just communicating at people, actually spending that time listening as well.
I think so. And, it goes back to that vulnerable leader thing. Mm. Sometimes you have to admit you don't have a real clear idea at the moment, but you're working on it, and here's what you're thinking about, and brainstorm and whatnot. But sometimes you have to just admit, I can't fix this problem right now. I'm not exactly sure how I'm gonna, but here's what I'm doing about that to kind of come back to you with a couple of ideas that maybe collectively we can embrace. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it is just simply knowing that companies get through crises most of the time. as do most families. It doesn't mean that you aren't impacted by it, but most of us do emerge on the other side of something. And helping people recognize and remember when we did is very powerful, I think.
Yeah, that's a very strong message, isn't it? And actually, it's maybe using this as a catalyst to do something. I mean, I've seen a few businesses going, oh, do you know, finally, we've been meaning to do this for years, but we've now put our XYZ online or done whatever. And I suppose your whole point about also thinking about the structure is an opportunity for us to maybe stop and take a pause and think about that strategic difference and embedding some of those potentially.
Oh, without question. I mean, even when you think about the outgoing CEO, Ginny Rometty at IBM, she said, wherever you are, I'm not quoting her directly, but, you know, in essence, wherever you are on the digital transformation scale, this has just moved you right along. Yeah. So wherever you were, you're there now. And no, I think that's exactly right. So you want to talk about, convergence of forces here that is going to make us extraordinarily different going forward.
And on that note, I suppose perhaps maybe in the last 5 minutes or so, in terms of other HR typical activities, processes, use of technology, classic, digital transformation, are there any that stand out to you that would be, or maybe even would be quick wins for us to prioritise as HR or people professionals in the workplace? In terms of, refreshing our approach to anything?
Yeah, sure. So I think as people begin to think about, and many have already done this for a while, certainly I think our colleagues in Asia and Europe have, come to this party a little earlier, but thinking about as we start to return to some semblance of normalcy, and I use that in the widest, loosest possible, conception here. What are the things we should be thinking about? And I would encourage your listeners to visit the website and see one of the pieces that we have here. It's called Through a Glass Darkly. And it really is an opportunity to ask the kinds of questions that you should be asking with your colleagues. And there's a planner, it's a spreadsheet that captures all those questions where people can lead the conversation. I think that's important for those of us in the human capital space to say, let's talk about the people implications of a return for work. And it's everything from assessing sort of where you are, as we've talked about now, about, is the business still the same, and, what would be different about it? But also, what's our understanding of the community support? It's one thing to announce that you want to open the offices. It's another if people don't feel comfortable getting on public transit to get there. Even things like what's available for resources. If you don't have on-site, food facilities, what's open? How would you bring people back? With who, and what's the time frame? Who? What will the workplace look like? The level of cleanliness and the level of sanitation and the sheer number of things that you need to just think about the physical workplace of how many people you're going to allow on a floor or a shop floor or a manufacturing plant or an office space. What are the protocols of coming in? How do you screen? If you have a requirement in your locality to provide personal protective equipment, can you even get your hands on it? And can it be sanitized? And for those who are differently abled, how do you get your hands on that kind of protective equipment as well? So it's just, there's 1,000 questions you need to ask.
And that's on a template, is it? What did you say that was called?
It's called a planner.
A planner.
And it's, in fact, I'll share the links and make sure that your folks can get it.
Yeah, I'll put them directly, because the website we're talking about is www.conferenceboard.org, isn't it? In terms of this, is that the one we go to get this?
Actually, what I will do is it's a tiny bit more complicated. Let me send you the links, and if you wouldn't mind, we'll put it right in. But it's conference-board.org.
Yeah.
And you can't miss the COVID-19 coronavirus image that I think is seared into all of our brains. But that's right there on the landing page on the banner. And
that sounds like, and they can go in and that resource. What I thought about that is just even when you were going through that 8 or 9 questions. Gosh, I hadn't even thought about that. So helping people to have a real, and also given that actually loads of HR professionals are, certainly in the UK, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about the slight difference in furloughing. The rules are changing all the time, and the government hasn't been maybe as clear. Hopefully by the time this podcast goes out, they will have clarified, but HR professionals are having to create clarity where there isn't very much. So it's easy not to therefore think broadly. You start thinking quite narrowly. So it would be quite helpful, I think, to have this particular document. So I'll definitely link and share that.
Yeah, and the spreadsheet just lists all these questions, and it talks about the time frame and who are the key stakeholders and what's the level of difficulty. Is there a cost? What are the notes that you need from the community here? But one of the tabs in this downloadable spreadsheet, this reset and recovery planner, we're calling it, a return to the reimagined workplace. There's a whole tab there full of, think about the different impacts that are going to be in place now for virtually every HR process and procedure you have. Many people decided to compensate people differently if they were on the front lines and at higher risk. So now what do you do with that? Many people, at least in the United States, they took pay cuts, they lost bonuses. Many people took massive pay cuts, but were able to keep health benefits. You now have people who can work remotely and some who cannot. What's the fair way to compensate them for different roles? What do we do with performance management initially, certainly, and then going forward? How will we monitor remote work? There are still some managers out there who believe that if they don't see you working in a cubicle, obviously you're at the spa. And I think nothing could be further from the truth, but for a lot of managers, this is a tough one. I'm surprised at the number of companies, many of them marquee names, who were caught flat-footed on working remotely. And I thought surely that would have been part of their thinking process, even if it's from a regular business continuity perspective, where you kind of think through, what are the people implications for whatever scenario plans, you walk through as an organization. But a lot of people, people didn't have laptops. They didn't have, connectivity at home. They had no dedicated workspace. And so their immediate concerns were just getting people up to speed. And, we all saw the horror stories about not having a VPN in place. And so people were at great risk for hackers. And that, of course, exposes business secrets and IP. So, I'm hopeful that this planner, and again, I don't pretend to have the answers. But I do think I have a pretty good grip from all the member companies around the world that I talk to, what some of the questions are. And most of the folks I speak with are not in a hurry to race back to some, semblance of whatever iteration of the workplace it is. I think they're being very thoughtful, being very cautious, and are very concerned about not bringing people back if they truly think that there's going to be a resurgence. And there's some very large, well-known organizations that have already announced that, folks are working at remote locations through the fall, if not through the end of the year.
Yeah, I think Twitter have said that. Some of your big names said they can indefinitely do it. Yes.
That's right. So I think those are the kinds of questions every company has to decide. What does it need to do? What does it need to look like in order to be a sustainable, viable organization going forward? Only the people who are the leaders, and HR is at the forefront of this, only those leaders can decide what's best for them. But my hope is that the work we've done and the collective wisdom that we've tried to bring from all of our member company organization conversations into the work here on the website, as well as the planner, that maybe it's a good place to start. That's our hope, and that's why we've made it available to the public, because we just think that's the right thing to do right now.
That's very much appreciated, and I think it's a really kind of positive way to. And what I liked is that we don't, even though you've done all this, this research and all across the country, you don't know the answers, because everyone's got a slightly different circumstance. But if we have the questions, then we can work out the best possible answer for our circumstances. So I think actually that's a really helpful thing to have those questions. Rebecca, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and also with your resources. And as I will make sure that we'll get those out as widely as possible so that the HR Uprising colleagues can benefit from them. And I really appreciate it, because I think we've done a real whistle-stop tour through the impact of, right from what the questions we need to ask, what do we do in terms of wellbeing, in terms of onboarding, talent acquisition, performance management, culture. So we've touched on lots of topics, but also we've kept it practical. So there are questions that that listeners can go to and start thinking about what they can do in their areas, and challenge their leadership and support their leaders to do the best for their people and make their way out of this. Is there, in terms of people getting hold of yourself, Rebecca, are you happy me putting your contact details, or how do you like to be contacted if someone wants to get in touch with you?
Sure. So I'd be happy to, and you have my email link and my LinkedIn profile. So happy to connect. You know, I first of all want to say thank you for the opportunity to be with you. It's I've had the opportunity to listen and learn from many of your previous guests, and I'm honored to be included. And the only thing I would say is that I have always thought that what we do is vitally important. But I'm not sure we've ever been more relevant or important right now in terms of helping organizations, which is, at the end of the day, it's people, get through this unprecedented pandemic. But I do believe that our best days are ahead of us, and we'll get there. And part of that reason we will is because of the dedication of the folks who are most likely listening to this podcast right now. So thank you, Lucinda.
Absolutely. Thank you. And it's about people, absolutely, we always talk about rising up and showing our value and hopefully being recognised for the value that people bring. So much appreciated, Rebecca. Thank you for coming on the HR Uprising podcast, and thanks to all our listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast. You can access more information, including resources or links mentioned in the show, at our website, www.hruprising.com. Also, you might want to join our LinkedIn community or tweet to us at HR Uprising. We'd love to hear from you.